Hello, and welcome to the Love Procurement Podcast. My name is Paul Zammit, and I'll be your host for today's conversation. I'm glad to welcome Luis Avila to the show. Luis is the Managing Director of Technology and Transformation and an aerospace and defense industry leader at BDO. But Luis, I think you can tell us more about yourself than I can. So could you give us a little bit of background about your professional experience?
Yes, thank you, Paul. And in regards to my journey, I started over 20 years ago, and I initially focused on the aerospace and defense industry. I started in industry. I held different positions in the office of the CFO, and then spent a large amount of my professional career in consulting, helping organizations navigate through the highly regulated and complex environment of the aerospace and defense industry from different angles. I did risk consulting, helping with compliance, understanding the large set of acronyms that we have in this environment and what they meant for their organizations. Then I also assisted companies through the deal life cycle, going through the entire deal advisory or deal stages, going from the beginning, identifying the right company to acquire, going through due diligence, and then post-merger integration. I've also helped organizations with strategy, and I think what will be the focus today is business transformation. So help organizations with all the aspects of what a true transformation means. Program management office, organizational change management, adoption, which is really important, and business process improvement and compliance to make sure that the technology and the strategic objectives actually stick at the end of the day, and that there's a return on the investment for enterprise applications.
Quite a journey. And I know you've said you've specialized for a good bit of time in aerospace and defense, which it's interesting you come from. I didn't know you came from a mergers and acquisitions background, but pretty common thing in manufacturing in general and in aerospace and defense, and it always tends to have tech stack implications too. So I'm sure we'll uncover a little bit more of that. But maybe to take a step back, anyone can turn on the news at any time of day and find some geopolitical impact on manufacturers that is probably impacting procurement teams and the way they're looking at business transformation. Are you seeing teams adjusting their objectives and priorities as a result? What kind of impact are you seeing just from a geopolitical sense on manufacturers?
Yeah. If I can step back for a moment, I think the topic of trade is very interesting. We've seen the evolution of trade over the last 40 years or so, where I don't know if you recall, there was a time in which companies would just look for whoever's able to manufacture a component, subcomponent at the lowest price, right? Regardless of where it was in the world. So that's where we thought about sourcing as just in time. Let's get the cheapest component in the door, and let's make sure we're able to satisfy demand. Now, over time, we started bringing those sourcing capabilities, that trade, closer to home. And then we started seeing a nearshoring, a friendshoring stage where we were trying to get those subcomponents and components closer to home because of cybersecurity threats, because of counterfeit electronic parts, and just the global risk of sourcing from places that perhaps don't have the best intentions for the United States, right? So that's what we started seeing. And now we find ourselves with the challenges of persistent inflation and trying to accommodate these this environment of constant changes in tariffs, right? So let me tell you, I mean, the role of a procurement or sourcing lead at any company is one that it's not boring. Like they have, it seems like every couple of years the environment changes, right? And they have to
Mhm.
adjust. They have to make sure that their companies maintain the resilience necessary to satisfy demand. And I'm sure we'll talk about at some point of the whole concept of anti-fragility. The ability to anticipate um, what are the possible trends coming up, developing a strategy to address each one of those headwinds, and leverage to the extent possible innovation technology to make sure that you stay ahead and don't get caught by surprise. Oh, now we have a different landscape. Well, we have to anticipate those changes based on what we're seeing in the global landscape.
Tough problems to solve. And I think procurement and supply chain suddenly became important to the world very clearly during COVID, when we all sort of saw uh, the impact of what global supply chain disruption can do. And then, as you pointed out, right, recent geopolitical changes, tariffs, um, other events happening globally, even weather events, right? Quickly pointing out the need to completely reevaluate sort of the way that teams are approaching ultimately like their supplier relationships. And I know when we were planning today for this, um, you pointed out that you have a three-part framework for this, that you think teams should really focus on, fostering resilience, agility, and safety, which you kind of started to um, discuss already. And before we dive into them, can you just tell us about this framework that you have at a high level? Um,
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. So more than a framework is really an awareness of the three pillars that every procurement professional should keep in mind to safeguard the integrity of their supply chain and to help the organization overcome challenges in this global landscape and really maintain the competitive advantage. Because at the end of
mhm.
the day, if we don't have a business, to help, then what are we doing here, right? So we need to make sure our companies maintain that competitive advantage, are able to satisfy demand, and maintain the reputation, right? Because if you start pushing out products that have counterfeit electronic parts, well, your reputation is probably going to get damaged. So,
Mhm.
with that in mind, as you mentioned, resilience is one of them. Right? The capacity, the ability to expand your supplier base, to diversify your supplier base, to be able to anticipate economic uncertainty to the extent possible, because nobody has a crystal ball, right?
Mhm.
But to the extent possible, based on trends, based on what we know, the ability to navigate persistent high inflation and fluctuating interest rates, like that's important. The second pillar is agility, deploying technologies that enable rapid adaptation to market shifts, in creating that competitive differentiation and aligning with changing um, market priorities. And last but not least, safety. And I know I come from an aerospace and defense background, but this applied to many different industries. And when you look at the defense ecosystem, it's very diverse. We're talking
Mhm.
about professional services, IT services, defense electronics, even engineering construction. There are many different types of companies that help that defense supplier base. So addressing evolving cybersecurity threats, there's this concept of the cybersecurity maturity model certification. That's the type of compliance companies in that sector need to abide by, and identifying and implementing the right technologies that ensure compliance without excessive spending, balancing security requirements at the end of the day with operational efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Which is an ever increasing challenge as those compliance requirements, always increase. But I think we'll dig into all of those topics in a bit. And I think you're right. It's more than a framework. They really are pillars: resilience, the ability to bend without breaking; agility, the ability to pivot, to move quickly; and safety, the ability to do this in a secure fashion. They do all sum up, like you mentioned, to that idea of anti-fragility, that an organization isn't just able to survive turmoil or the unpredictable, but they can actually thrive in response if they have these sort of core tenets implemented and they're able to use technology to leverage them. Then they can become an anti-fragile procurement team, an anti-fragile supply chain that is a competitive advantage for them. But maybe let's get a little more grounded into out of the theory of it and into the some of the examples, I think, as you've been talking about, because you've got a lot of experience with enterprise transformation. So when we're talking about how these are enabled by today's technology, we can start with resilience. You've talked a bit about how we've moved from globalization to friendshoring to protectionism, and how we need to maintain the integrity of the supply chain, right? Especially in light of regulations that do require deeper supply knowledge. Can you tell us a bit about how technology really plays a role in providing resilience for organizations, especially from a data perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. And we live in very exciting times. I mean, innovation, the rise of, you remember Internet of Things, and then we have generative AI, and now we have agentic AI. I mean, it is really exciting. We're going really fast, and we are able to unlock faster capabilities to analyze data. And this is where I'm going to go with the use of technology in terms of resilience, in terms of security. An enterprise resource planning tool was generally viewed as silos or swim lanes or pillars, whatever you want to call it, of information, right? And it was up to the operator, the human being, to be able to extract what they needed in order to apply their experience and figure out, you know what, I think we're going to have a problem here. Or I see that our business is not heading in the right direction, but there was time, there was resources spent just to be able to weave the information across these pillars. And that's where we are now. Now we don't need to spend as much time. We still need a human operator, of course, but what agentic AI is now providing is the ability to weave those different types of data and figured out, this is where I may have a risk. This is where my business is heading, and then produce outcomes that are then reviewed by a human being, relieving some of the time, relieving some of the bandwidth, and allowing them to do other things. If I can, for just a few minutes, I heard something that was incredible at Avalua now a couple of months ago. There was this procurement leader who was saying that with agentic AI, with the use of these new technologies, AI is allowing them to have more human interaction. And I remember everybody in the audience was like, wait a second, I can't marry those, I can't connect those two dots. Please tell us more. So he went on to say, what used to take us, let's just pretend for a moment, 8 hours of our day now takes us 4 hours of our day. And I'm able to now use the other 4 hours to do what we used to do before COVID, which is go to our suppliers, visit them, understand exactly what's in the pipeline, what are some of the risks they're seeing down the road with sub-suppliers, right? So increasing the amount of intelligence that these procurement organizations now have, because AI has allowed them to have that human interaction. So to this day, this was what, about 2-3 months ago that we had Avila now. That has stuck in my head, and it's really a great and positive way to think about how technology is revolutionizing the way in which we do business, how fast we're able to digest information and make decisions, and giving us the ability to do more.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a really cool connected story you've told there. Like we have access to more data. So the likelihood of an adverse event or the likelihood of an issue somewhere in our tier end supply chain, data is giving us signals more, right? That we need to make a response here. But technology also and there's a resilience component to that, of course, because I'm getting more information about potential risks, and so we're more empowered to respond, right? But I really like what you highlighted for my value and now, because there's the other side of it, which is with AI agents, with generative AI and automation in general, right? Procurement teams have more time, as you've noted. So they actually have more time to respond to those signals and go visit the tier one supplier and do the relationship thing. It's really funny you mentioned this, because when I was talking to a procurement leader about how during the pandemic, and this is on the notion of the importance of relationships and resiliency, he was able to pick up the phone and call his tier one suppliers and secure supplies that his competitors weren't able to secure, because he had the relationship and because he had fostered specific relationships with a specific network of strategic tier one suppliers. And that's a human thing, right? Like there was a business to business. So it's really cool what you're pointing at. There's a rehumanization of procurement through AI that plays into resiliency as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like what you just said, rehumanization. I hope you haven't trademarked that, because I'm going to use it. That's great. It is true. We all think about the old days, I guess, the days before the pandemic happened, and how we used to have that human interaction. But I am really glad to see that we are now using technology to get there, because at the end of the day, and I think you pointed to this, it's a people business, right? We're all human beings. It's the relationships that you're able to create and maintain through your supply chains. And you said it perfectly. If I am let's say I'm a tier one, tier two supplier, and I'm starting to see some constraints in the raw materials, in the subcomponents I'm getting, and I only have a certain amount of components to give, I'm probably going to reach out to let them know to those that I have closer relationships with, right? So all of a sudden you start seeing is those relationships that really create strong bonds. And at the end of the day, it's that corporation that allows enterprises to maintain that resiliency, because we all depend on certain supply chains. I mean, you were talking about mergers and acquisition earlier. You can try to have vertical integration by acquiring companies, but at the end of the day, there's generally always someone that supplies you with something, whether it is directly into your supply chain or as indirect procurement, right? Something that allows you to manufacture or put or assemble something that you're creating.
Right. Especially we talk about aerospace and defense, or even automotive, where you have 5 tiers deep, in aerospace and defense 8 to 10 tiers deep, and often super specialized producers, right? Where I think some of the leaders in this space, they have good visibility a few tiers down. It's very hard to get all the way down, right? But they've emphasized the need for clean, connected data, and they have good visibility a few tiers down. And they understand, I think, especially when you have a super specialized supply base, and this plays into resiliency, and you talked about it, that we can't just go for the cheapest thing out there. To a certain degree, like if I have specialized suppliers, I need to make sure that they stay financially healthy. And I've talked to procurement leaders who they'll set aside business at a worse price to keep a specialized supplier afloat because it makes their supply chain more resilient, and it helps the more strategic objective of their business, right? So that they can ultimately have supply so that their production teams can produce. And it's a complex calculation, right? But it's really fascinating what folks are doing nowadays, thanks to technology empowering them to look into things like that.
Yeah, you just mentioned something that I think it's worth taking the time to discuss a little bit, which is the challenge of tier N visibility, right? There are certain industries where it is, I won't call it easier, but the supply chains have created such a structure that maybe tier 1, 2, and 3 are visible, and then afterwards, it's not quite visible. Others where you get to tier 2 and that's it, like you don't really know where things are coming from. In aerospace defense and defense electronics and in highly sensitive supply chains, that's a very important issue. And it's an issue that it's on everybody's mind. And just a few years ago, I did some research. I tried to find the right technology out there that could help organizations unlock tier N visibility. And while there were certain promising technologies, none of them could really do it, right? And then, but that was 3-4 years ago. Now with what we have, now with agentic AI, now with Gen AI, I think we have more powerful tools at our disposition to start cracking that tier N visibility, and really have that visibility allows us to make better and informed decisions. Because at the end of the day, you may have right or wrong decisions from a business leader, but as long as it's informed, it's factual, and it relies on data, nobody has a crystal ball. Everybody makes mistakes. Hopefully you're making more right decisions than wrong decisions. but as long as it is based on facts and there's a rationale for it, we can trace back as to where the decision, perhaps if it was a wrong decision, where did it got wrong, right? Where did we make the wrong assumption based on those facts? But at the end of the day, it's all about information. We need to make informed decisions. Procurement leaders need to be able to produce the information necessary for the chief operating officer, for the CEO, for the CFO to make those informed decisions and navigate through the much larger complex landscape.
Mm-hmm. And that we're leading into that second pillar of agility and acting quickly. And I like how you're really emphasizing the decision-making side of it, because there's two aspects to this. First is like getting the right data or the right signals, but then we have to make that available to folks, right? Like if in very simple terms, if I have a subcontractor and I am aware, thanks to some amount of tier N visibility I've gotten, that a critical subcontractor for them or sub-supplier for them has been sanctioned, that information needs to instantly head to my contract manager. Like we want to see the impact of that right away, right? Like in a practical place, and establish how that impacts our program that we're working on for whatever project we're delivering, if we're talking about an aerospace and defense environment, right? So it's sort of this, having the data is one thing, but then it needs to be aggregated and give folks a single digital thread and push it everywhere that it needs to push so they can act quickly, which I think is what is probably the right thing to talk about now, which is like, what is the opportunity cost for teams that can't move fast enough, right?
Yeah. And from a technology perspective, I think an important concept there is interconnectivity with multiple ERPs and ecosystems, because you don't want to have an enterprise application that doesn't connect to a certain ERP. So you need to extract data and then input data and then extract again data and input data again. That's where A, we lose time, B, you need resources, and C, that's where human error can occur, right? And just yesterday, I was chatting with a few of my Avila friends, and we were talking about how to strengthen those interconnectivities with all of the principal ERPs in the aerospace and defense ecosystem, and that's important. And I like that is top of mind for Avila, and that plays a critical role when we talk about agility and when we talk about a seamless human experience with enterprise applications, because I don't want to have to log in somewhere, log out, and then log in somewhere else, right? That seamless experience is what really makes technology sticks, because it removes the friction from having to do something else. We've all heard that concept. If you want people to do something, you remove the friction that they have in order to do it, right? So so agility is all about, from a technology perspective, it's all about seamless interconnectivity from enterprise applications to ERPs, and from the outputs is having the data necessary for business leaders to make those informed decisions.
And making sure that it's good data, right?
Of course.
Especially in the era of artificial intelligence, right? Garbage in, garbage out is what they say, and it's not. We don't even have to say garbage in, garbage out. If you're operating in a way that you described, where you have disconnected systems, then you might have people or AI agents operating off outdated data, right? Which can be really problematic, because then you'll end up making the wrong decision, and head down absolutely the wrong path.
If I can just pivot for a quick moment based on what you said, you just reminded me of this recent study from Harvard Business School, where they noted that a high amount of Gen AI or any type of AI initiatives fail. And I think it was a very high percentage, 70%, 80%. But it was based on the following. So primarily two points. When we have historically thought about an IT related project, we've thought about the end in mind. So I want technology to do A, B, C, the output is D. And I know that no matter how many times I do this, I'm always going to get D, right? With Gen AI, that's not the case. You build platforms, not a specific sequence of events. You build a platform, you let your employees use it. And you may be surprised that some people may use it for a completely different use case that you ever thought about. And that's the beauty of AI. It provides the platform for people to use it in the best, what would best help them with their job, with their tasks, etc. So there's a little bit of that. It's not that they fail, it's just that the Gen AI output or platforms end up being used for something else that was not originally intended for, just because they realized there was a better use case. But the second point, and this is relating back to what you were saying, is that Gen AI has a little bit of a bad reputation, and that's just because we've all seen and heard, oh, Gen AI is giving me something fictitious, right? They made up information that it's not true. But it's because if we all understand what it's supposed to do, it's supposed to predict a word after another, it's supposed to look at a database, but it doesn't know what's fact from fiction. It's just creating information, right? So if we think that we can just run Gen AI and let it go, then that's exactly where the bad outputs begin, right? Using that type of technology is a lot of responsibility. Like, we have the privilege now in our times to have this technology with us. We have to use it properly, and we have to apply our knowledge and figure out what's true from what's not true. And if we acknowledge that concept, I think we'll have much better outcomes using this type of technology. I'm sorry I diverted there for a second, but what you said just reminded me of that. And I think it's an important concept to understand, because we can do great things with Gen AI. Let's just use it properly.
Yeah, and I think it actually plays right into what we're talking about, because we're talking about using technology as a backbone to empower resilience and agility, right? So thus far as what we've talked about. And we've talked about the importance of information and the promise of AI and agentic systems have for that. But there is an element of safety and security, right, that has to come into play. And it relates directly to this relationship between like information systems, people, and AI agents, right? AI needs access to the right information. That information needs to be clean, needs to be connected across the ecosystem, and it needs to be in a way that the generative AI or the LLM or the AI agent can understand the information and contextualize it and make sense of it, so that it heads on the proper path. Because I think what you were describing was how we're moving from very rigid deterministic workflows, do A, do B, then do C, to more having technology help us work the way people work, which is you give it an objective and it figures out the right way to get to that objective. We're not just necessarily taking the same road every time. But to do that, right, we need all these ingredients, especially around getting the right guardrails, getting the right transparency and auditability, getting the right data and the right context for that data. And then, of course, I think, and this is probably where we should start with the safety and security conversation, and then maybe we can move back towards maybe some of those consumer electronics examples. But I think cybersecurity, right? If I'm approaching getting a single digital thread for my procurement and for my supply chain, and I'm putting everything in a system, but we live in a world where there are now AI agents. So suddenly cybersecurity is way more of a concern, because a misused AI agent by someone in my company can do a fair amount of damage. A misuse of an AI agent from like an external threat, right? Like a malicious prompt injection or something like that, can do way more damage. You know, can you talk through what you think? I've talked way too much because you're the star of the show here. What do you like? How do you see this stuff? Because I really like what you're looking at.
Yeah, it all starts with the environment, right? Where is it hosted? Because as you may know, not all environments are created the same way. Some applications are hosted in commercial environments. There are government environments. Now, government environments like GovCloud, it doesn't mean necessarily government as in government agencies, but it also means commercial companies that handle sensitive information from our federal systems, from our federal government. And that may be, for example, export controlled, right? So that type of selecting an enterprise application, an ERP that is hosted in the GovCloud is mandatory. It's table stakes. If you are operating in an environment like the aerospace and defense environment, or if you do defense electronics. So it always starts with where is it hosted, because that helps you then provide the necessary tools to create the security framework necessary to comply with standards like the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification. Now, when I say the framework, while you're able to leverage technology, and you should to the extent possible, there's also a human component, because at the end of the day, it's a human that is going to go in and log into a computer. So while password may be one part of the scenario, the other scenario is like two-factor authentication, making sure the individual is who it is, right? Or it could be like fingerprinting or whatever. But the ability to create that framework and then to establish an adequate adoption in the organization is really critical for those companies, or for companies, to maintain the resilience against cybersecurity attacks, against counterfeit electronic part risks, non-conforming parts. Right now, I'm thinking about so many situations in which it wasn't necessarily the technology that created non-compliance. It was just the lack of awareness of a certain mandate, especially with export control information. Sometimes it can be very easy to just write an email. Oh, I'm going to write an email to my colleague here in the UK. The UK is very close to the US, so why does it matter? We're friends. I'm just going to let him know, hey, these are the specs you need to confirm for that SKU item, because it's part of the F-35 program. It's part of like a sensitive program, right? And all of a sudden, you just exported information that is sensitive and critical for national security, right? So, anyways, I'm just giving a fictitious example of how this can happen, but it really it's a matter of framework, use of technology, and adoption. Because at the end of the day, adoption is what really creates that firewall against adversarial threats that are trying to get into your company.
I love the email example because it reminds me, right? So like phishing attacks are getting scary, sophisticated, and to that degree in manufacturing, because counterfeit parts is an issue, and sort of spoof suppliers is an issue, and then in aerospace and defense, even more of an issue, because I think you don't just have spoof suppliers, right? You have counterintelligence threats from non-friendly countries, right? Doing business via email is kind of not so safe anymore, right? Because of the threat of a phishing attack, right? You sort of need a platform where every single supplier you're doing business with is being communicated through a secure channel. We know that they're not just a phony supplier account that's been created, because a lot of due diligence has been able to occur, and like all of that is consolidated and stored in a single place, right? With a thread. And that's just like a tip of the iceberg, right? That's just to know my supplier, not even to get into like what's going on at their plants and what's going on from a quality perspective with their items, and getting all the other information I need just to sort of ensure that I have this safety framework, right? Like in an operational sense, and not just in a cybersecurity sense, right? It's such a multifaceted concept. And I really like the way that you've kind of like taken us through these, right? Which resilience, the ability to bend without break, to reiterate it, right? Agility, the ability to react quickly, to pivot, to move at speed. Safety and security, the ability to do these things in a contained and safe way, do really add up to that idea of anti-fragility. That if I have all this in place and I'm doing it well with technology, I've established myself as being able to respond to whatever happens. And if I can respond better than my competition can respond, I'm getting ahead. I'm like a competitive, procurement is now a competitive advantage for my business.
Yes.
Is there more you want to say on that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is about helping the organization stay competitive through the use of technology and business intelligence, right? Having the right analytical mindset, making informed decisions.
Yeah, and I think maybe to take it into your specialization with aerospace and defense.
Yeah.
I feel like every day it's in the news, right? Like maybe, XYZ company has 12 years of production backlog, right? Or, some new country is increasing, military spending, right?
Yeah.
Or Saudi Arabia are starting a new airline and they just ordered, I think, like 200 planes on order or something like that. So backlogs are growing faster than revenue. And if we want to scale production, you need to scale supply. And if you want to scale supply, you need to transform the way you manage supplier relationships. And that means you need technology to help you do that, which I think is sort of the context that we've been talking through the whole time here.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's a people business. We need to make sure that in the context of security, we need to make sure that policies, technologies used the right way, that adoption sticks. As you were talking, I remember another great example, if I can, for just a minute. Something even so a long time ago, I'm talking about 10, 12 years ago, I learned of a case where an individual was reviewing a purchase order that had export controlled information, right? And there was another individual literally in the same room, and there was no printer. So he said, you know what, I'm just going to email it to you. So he emailed the purchase order to the individual next to him, right? That email went to India and came back in the matter of seconds because the servers were hosted there.
Mm-hmm.
That was an export control violation that had to be reported. But it's so simple. If we're not mindful of what those rules are, we can make simple mistake. All it takes is a simple mistake that can really create a lot of risk for companies.
Yeah, and get expensive too.
Get expensive. Yes.
Okay, so this is the Love Procurement Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to finish by sharing the love. Right. You've given a lot of great advice, and it's been a pleasure talking with you, Luis. But what is a piece of advice, if you have to give it sort of tightly? What are people walking away with for you from a love procurement perspective? What advice are you leaving them with?
That's a great question, Paul. I think, in the context of technology-enabled transformation, in the context of what we're talking about here, technology is great and we need to use it wisely, but it's important to remember that it's a journey and it's all about thoughtful planning. It's all about thoughtful strategy. Let's remember technology is an enabler that allows organizations meet their strategic goals. So always make sure you have a clear strategy. And I always say this, it's better to measure twice and cut once.
Mm-hmm.
A well-defined strategy, a well-defined plan with organizational change management really makes the enterprise, application transformation journey much simpler. And if I can, now from a personal perspective, I'll tell you, we've been talking a lot about this lately in terms of like leadership and in the day-to-day in our businesses. There's a lot of noise out there, and they say, if you think about 70% of your emails, 70% of your chats may be noise. It's really the 20%, 30% that really moves the needle, that's really aligned with your strategy. Just be mindful. What's noise versus signal? Follow the signal. That's what's going to lead you to success.
Yeah, I might have more than 70% noise in my inbox today. Luis, this has been great. If folks want to connect with you, they want more of that sage wisdom. Can you tell us where they can connect with you, LinkedIn and so on and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. So please follow me in LinkedIn. It's Luis Avila at BDO. And yeah, my email address is lmavila@bdo.com. Please send me an email if you want to continue the discussion. And feel free to go to bdo.com, where you may find all of our strategic technology partnerships, our enterprise transformation solutions, including program management, organizational change management, adoption, data migration, and business process improvement and compliance. I'm always, happy to spend 15 minutes, 30 minutes just talking about the industry, exchanging ideas. It doesn't need to be a specific need. It can just be, hey, let's connect, let's network, and I'm always happy to do that.